So, today we're going to be talking about leadership, but you and I had a small conversation yesterday. A short conversation about what empathy meant for you. And we really wanted to focus it down that route. So, please, can you start us off with that?
It's great to be here talking to you, Peter. I think that there's a couple of things that we can talk about, and empathy is definitely one of them. It's a kind of, when you're talking about how you're driving your business or your organization, it is a superpower. It is really a way that you connect with people that you work with and understand their position, and to me it seems like that's the only way that you can really get the best results, because so much of businesses today and organizations are run by people telling other people what to do, and it's actually a very outdated model, and because it doesn't take in consideration understanding the people that you work with and understanding what their interests are actually.
Absolutely, and it's difficult to get buy-in from people if you don't understand people, right?
Yeah, no, it's and that's that's something that is I think that a lot of male leadership puts up roadblocks to this, because they are so protective of their own ideas and their own power structures that they're busy building. So they kind of close themselves off to actually listening to people, and that just becomes a very one-way communication, and it also sort of perverts the driving forces that you have in your venture.
This is interesting because, of course, when we talk about male versus female leadership, there are certain differences, and we don't always talk about this. Why do you think that is? Why do you think we kind of close our eyes to those differences?
Well, I think that, I feel like with a lot of things that happens today, it's obvious how much we're learning. It's obvious that, and I think that this is something to keep in mind when you're talking about, the way that we treat minorities, or the way we treat women, or the way that society is handling issues, is that once upon a time there weren't issues. And once upon a time, everyone thought that the role of a man was to be the strong person in the room, and that's how you get stuff done. But we learn, and the business models are not the same as they used to be 50 or 100 years ago. And leadership must change with that. And the problem is that the changes in leadership is not as dynamically driven as they should be, because if you look at all the markets are changing all the time, but we kind of cling to this outdated idea of leadership as someone who knows everything and makes all the decisions, and other people are just following, when that's not actually it's not a sustainable way to run a business, because you have to get everybody on board, and that means that buy-in, you rarely get that with orders. You get that by listening and figuring out solutions together.
This is true. You do need to listen. This is where empathy comes in.
Yeah.
Now, consensus is a separate issue.
Yeah.
Because you can lead through empathy, but if you lead through consensus, you get mediocrity, right?
Not necessarily. I mean,
okay, let's talk about that a little bit more.
Well, I mean, consensus doesn't have to be a compromise. A compromise means that everybody get a little bit of what they wanted, but you still haven't solved the equation. And and it's not necessarily so that you can give everybody everything that they want. But if you go behind what a person says, this is what I want, and start to look at the driving forces behind those decisions, then you actually do have a fair chance to figure out something that you can agree on. And I think that the whole idea of what the driving force is something that I don't think that we talk enough about. I find a lot of really successful businesses are driven by one person with an idea, and they're just gonna execute that idea, whatever it takes. And we hear a lot of success stories that are based on that. If it's Elon Musk or whomever it is, right? Who's just the guy who decides, I'm going to do this, and then they do something amazing. But we don't hear of all of the failed ventures that is built on that. We hear about the few ones that succeeds, and I think that if the driving force, instead of it being a vehicle for you to sell yourself and to make yourself important, if the driving force instead is, how can we solve this problem? And then you let whomever helps to solve this problem get credit for it, then you have, it's a slight shift, but it's a very important shift, I think.
So it's interesting because there is a clear difference here. I mean, when you are focused on one single, when one leader focuses on one single personal objective, and if they can rally people up to that objective, then that's great. They might achieve it. And you can get collectively into a lot of trouble as well.
Yeah.
But there is a difference between also saying, okay, well, let's see what everybody thinks, what everybody wants, and let's try to get to a consensus, versus let's try to get to the core understanding of what people actually need. Because a lot of the times what people say they need and they want are not really what they truly need inside. It's something that's behind that. And that empathy needs to come from that base need, not from the lips out. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I do. I mean, we all basically want love. That's, if you're going to go really to some kind of basic, we want to be appreciated, to find our place in society, and we want people to appreciate us. You can get appreciated for different things, and I think a lot of people have in the past realized, and today too, that you can be appreciated and powerful by just being a really powerful person, and then you don't have to be a nice person even. We have a lot of stories about people who make amazing things, and they're also not very good human beings. But I think that those solutions that comes from that are not, I mean, they may be individual projects that are really successful. But if you're talking about how we're going to change organizations to build a sustainable planet, then it's not as easy as you can have one person's objective, because we have a very complex world, and there are no binary solutions in a complex world. There's none like right and wrong. But still, a lot of companies are run by the idea that people can do wrong and they should do right. And I mean, if you imagine if you're a scientist, or where I come from as a designer, you never talk about the terminology like that's wrong or that's right. You just look at something and you say, that works a bit, could work better. That doesn't work. How can we make it work? And it's a much more dynamic model than I think a lot of the leadership models that we have today, that are just truly based on do the right thing, shut up and do the right thing. Excuse me.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. And it's shifting. It is shifting. It's not. It's do the right thing is no longer do the right thing in old terms, which is the right thing to do is what I tell you to do.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's no longer it.
Yeah.
Now we really need to understand what people desire, what people really truly need, and what our world desires, what's going to be sustainable, how we're going to achieve that. And yeah, like we were discussing yesterday and just now, empathy it plays a key role in that, because without it, well, we're just going to be playing at the fingertips of one single-minded, binary-minded leadership, right?
Yeah.
So that could get us into a lot of trouble. And if, for what I've seen in the studies that I've done in the past, that single-mindedness is what is right is profitable, what is wrong is not.
Yeah.
So what do you think of that?
Well, I think it's interesting when you look at some very successful ventures and look at what the driving force have been behind them. And I think we can all agree that ultimately the most successful products or ventures that has had longevity has been driven by an idea of making a better product or a better system. They haven't been driven by, let's see how we can milk the most money out of this. And it's a much more intelligent approach, of course, because if you make the best system, that's going to be the most profitable system. It might not be the most profitable system for one individual, but if we look at the venture and we look at the group, then it's definitely going to be more profitable for everyone that's involved in it. So it's a way of always focusing on the task. You're always focusing on the task, and in that mission, very strong personalities can be very inspiring and can be essential as a source of inspiration. But they should also step away from making all of the decisions because they have to be made in a larger context, I believe.
As a designer, I can understand that you have a different perspective of how leadership needs to be also designed.
Yeah.
I'm interested in that because you've designed some pretty amazing things. You've designed the goals. The pin that you have here. I want one of those, by the way. I really do.
I'll send you one.
And that the concept behind it is beautiful. It's elegant. It is a great design, and it's a design that brings out leadership. I would like us to focus on that a little bit more.
Yeah. First of all, I ran the design team that made this. I'm a designer too, so I did a little design. There are other people who were more instrumental in the actual making of the icons, etc., etc. And I especially want to mention Christina Rugg-Gresley, who is a Swiss fantastic designer, who she plotted out the whole system in a way that I couldn't have done. So there's a big team behind it. But the most, if you're dealing with designers, if you're in a studio and you're designing something, and a designer comes up with some solutions, you can't go and say that's wrong. It's just, it's impossible, and it goes both ways, because the designer who has come with a suggestion, if you criticize that designer can't say, oh, I'm criticized as a person now because I did something that wasn't good. It's a much more fluid way of finding ideas and solutions for things, where you truly go in and say, I toss out this, I don't know, maybe there's something in it. And then someone else comes and say, yeah, there's something in that, but that doesn't work. Okay, let's work on that part. It's much more collaborative way of dealing with it. So obviously I'm drawn to those methods. And then I think I have, from the day I was born, I have a problem with authorities. And that I inherited from my dad, who also had a problem with authorities. So I've had an issue with every time someone says, "I know what's best, do what I say," and then I'm going to be the opposite. Then I'm going to say, "I'm going to prove that there's another way." It's just, it's immature, but you get those kinds of reactions when you exert power in the decision process, because there shouldn't be power in the decision process. There shouldn't be that I say this or you do what I say because it's my company. There are issues where you have to have those things, but if you're talking about the products, you have to. Why are you working with all these people to have them as your little mini-me's? Of course not. You have them because they're extremely talented. Because otherwise you wouldn't want to work with them. So you have to involve them in the process in the decision process. So going from a binary system, I think that's the most important thing. And I happen to think that this is much easier for women to do, because men are raised in a way for decades now, or hundreds of years, that you're the guy who's going to make the decisions. You're the strong guy. And we're not stronger than women. We have, maybe some of us has some more muscles, not me, but it's just, we're ruling this world based on the fact that we can hit women. And that's a pretty low bar to set, superiority in some way. So that whole thing's just got to go.
Yeah, that whole thing definitely has to go. I've seen situations where they say, he hits me because he loves me. No, he doesn't. That's not love. So staying away from that aspect of it, because it's just too horrifying really to get into. When you say about your problem with authority, and you say that it's immature, I think it's not. I think it's not immature. I think what you're doing is that you're reaching out to grab onto sanity in something that has become insane. Let me explain a little. I think you're reaching out to grab that because remember what they say that the definition of insanity is? Doing the same thing over and over again, except expecting a different result. So when you're going in one direction and you turn around and you see that everybody is taking the same direction as you are, and we're not getting the results we want to get, this little thing that you have, and a lot of us have, which is that problem with authority, is reaching out to that little bit of sanity that is going against the status quo for a better world. But we need to do it from a good base, not just from the ego.
But that goes to one of my central things is that because I've always been interested in math and in philosophy and logic, and for me it's everything that we're doing with sustainability is ultimately just about figuring out system that works. And in a system you can't have people who say, I'm right, because you have a system that is not working. Then you're not right. So I think that, the way I look at it is that I like everyone, I'd love to get appreciation, but then I want to have appreciation from creating something that is objectively good for everybody. That's, you can discuss what the purpose of a company is. And for me, I think we should say that the purpose of a company is to make the world better in some place. And you can make the world better by making the best croissants. But if you need to have as an objective, like, how can I make this world better? Because if you can, someone would probably want to pay you something for it. And I think that that's something that's is forgotten a little bit, because a lot of companies are just running on things that has one advantage and then huge disadvantages. Like all the food supply systems we have, the drawbacks of that are just, it's insane. And no one would run his or her farm the way that we're running the whole planet, because they would be gone. It's just, there's no balance here, and there's no sense of positive effects and negative effects. And that's just because there are people who are only thinking about themselves.
This is true. But we do live in a world that has become more and more hedonistic as time goes by. And it's great to have people working in sustainability where we say, you know what, the system that we have been working on is broken. We need to change things. And it's interesting to know that it's difficult to get something 100% right.
Yeah.
This is a big planet, and it's not one system. It's a complex system filled with complex systems that are filled with complex systems. And one of these systems is a human being. We're
and
a
that's
complex system in our homes.
And that's where communication comes in, because if you look at the nationalists, the racisms, the everything that's coming up with Trump and Brexit and all of these things that we've talked to death about, that's because the world has changed and has become much more complex. And it's become much more complex in a way that has been driven by businesses and trade, etc. But we haven't explained what's happening. So we have people who really think that immigrants are taking jobs. We know it's automatization that does it. And the jobs doesn't disappear. They just change from one to the other. But we have a world that is really, really complex and hard to understand. And people who doesn't understand what's going on. And they've been let down by everybody. They've been let down by governments. They've been let down by companies. They've been let down by organizations, unions, etc., etc. So what do? They just say, well, I'm just going to vote with someone who's going to change something because I don't want this system. And they say, okay, this is a problem. It's got to be the immigrants that are doing it, because that's the only new factor that they see in the town. So ultimately, I know we started to talk about leadership, but I mean, communication is something that is the only remedy at this point, because if we don't get people with us, and if we can't deal with the shattering of civility and the hatred that's growing, we're not going to fix the climate either. We're not going to reach 1.5 degrees if there's no social sustainability. So, and maybe if I want to tie it back, or I should, that social sustainability has got to be an inclusive mechanism. And that inclusion's got to start in all organizations, because they are ultimately the problem solvers.
And how would we do that?
Well, the quickest fix is to give more power to women, because they're not frozen in this old way of looking at leadership. And we see that companies, organizations that have more women in leadership positions, they actually do make more money. They're more aware of the climate impact on the products. They're more aware of the world, and they're working to solve these issues. So I think women in leaderships, that's the quickest fix. Now you just have to get the men to give up their power, and because they should, because they would also be more loved, I think.
And how are we going to do that? So that's a difficult one to achieve as well.
We got to stop making powerful men our idols. We got to stop looking up to people with money and power. We got to look up to people that works for communities. We got to look up to nurses. We got to look up to teachers. We got to look up to inclusive business leaders. We got to look up to people who actually are making something great in this world. And we got to stop the fixation with GNP. We got to stop measuring the success of the planet in money alone. Because, as someone said that I meant, who wants to be the richest man on a dying planet? That's not the way forward.
It's definitely not the way forward. And a lot of the times these riches come with stuff, right? And the stuff is what gets us into trouble to begin with.
Yeah.
And the wanting more stuff. And because we want it, we're going to have to produce it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is extremely true. We're talking about we need to stop looking at people with that type of, let's say, lifestyle. We have to stop giving them the power. I think another power shift that we have here is that leadership is basically that before, it was about the acquisition of followers. It still is if you look at social media, right? But it's about the acquisition of people, really. It's let's get people to buy into this and let's get them to do what we need them to do. So this is how we get into trouble to begin with. This is how we get people to buy a lot of stuff that they don't need at prices that they don't want, they can't afford, to impress people they don't even like, right?
Yeah.
And get the world into bigger trouble that we can't afford. But, and I think this is an important one, we need to start looking up to people who serve people.
Definitely.
The leader, the true leader, has to serve other people, don't you think?
Yeah. It's just more interesting. It's just more, we talked about empathy. We can talk about kindness also. These are like real values that makes our lives worth living. Because we know from way too many examples that money doesn't buy you happiness. And it sounds really ridiculous to have to like in 2019 have to say that, but we thought that we would be over that myth a long time ago. But right now it is actually a situation that we don't have the luxury to think about, maybe we should live a little bit better. We have to get really serious changes right away.
We do.
And the way I see it is that 2020, that's going to be a mega year for information. We just have to get everybody to understand what's going on and take it seriously. And then after that, we have 10 years left to 2030. And that's when everything's got to change. And that's a huge job. So that's what I'm looking forward to. Really trying to cut through all of the misinformation and get real values out in the coming years. And then after that, we just have to rapidly change things.
I completely agree. And yeah. Okay. But you can't reach me through my phone. If you could reach me through my phone, then the conversation would end. Okay. Okay, perfect. Okay, so we'll end.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so very much. Thank you so very much. Just to end this segment, would you like to add anything that you believe our viewers would greatly to take great value from?
I don't know if I have something really new, but I could say, and maybe once again, that all the problems that we have today, when 100 years ago we were fighting against nature, we were trying to make be warm, have buildings, have water, have power, and all of that stuff. So you can say that nature was our enemy that we tried to conquer. And now, today, all the problems that we have in the world, we have created ourselves. Like literally all of them. Not earthquakes, fine. But other than that, I think literally we've created all the problems ourselves. And who has made them? It's men. It's only men who has created these problems. So who could fix this? I don't think it's men. I think some men can maybe change quickly enough, but we need a lot of women and we need a lot of power to them immediately. And men should just take a step back and see how it should be done, I think.
Well, thank you so much. This has been a brilliant conversation. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And please comment, like, and share.
Thank you.
Thank you.